Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. War fighting. Tom Joscelyn and Bill Roggio, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, they keep the Long War Journal, and there is an enormous amount of action in all directions by organizations that are competing with each other and attempting to kill anything around it that threatens, except for the fact that a major leader of al-Nusra, that's al-Qaeda, is making very nice and suspiciously is making remarks that are strikingly at odds with the generality of al-Qaeda. We are not at war with the Christians. We'll explore this, but first I begin with Mr. Joscelyn. We go to Aleppo, which is a stronghold and a battle zone, and you'd have to say at this point, a landscape not unlike the Terminator, in northwestern Syria. Within these last days, an offensive launched by the Islamic State, that's right, the Islamic State, which is operating freely in Iraq, is now mounting its forces in Aleppo. To what end? Tom, a very good evening to you. What is the Islamic State attacking? Is it the Assad forces? Is it al-Nusra? Good evening to you, Tom.
Good evening, John. Well, what's interesting here is in the last couple of weeks, the Islamic State has now launched at least three major offensives, taking Ramadi in Iraq, Palmyra in Syria, the ancient city there, and now in the last 2 days launching an offensive in northern Aleppo against other rebel forces, other rebel factions in Syria, and basically is taking towns and villages away from them in northern Aleppo. This is consistent with the Islamic State's sort of strategy from the beginning, which is, if you look back through their history, they've actually spent more time fighting rebel organizations and insurgency organizations that are trying to take down the Assad regime than they have the actual Assad regime itself. And so what the Islamic State did in the last 48 hours is basically launch an offensive to try and claim several towns and villages in northern Aleppo.
What is pushing back, at least from the reporting, and there's a photograph to accompany this on the Long War Journal site, is an organization called Jaysh alFath. What is that?
Well, Jaysh alFath is actually a coalition of different groups led by jihadist organizations that had stunning advances in Idlib going back to late March. Really, the groups that lead Jaysh alFath, which is the Army of Conquest, really are al-Qaeda linked. You have the al-Qaeda's official branch in Syria, which is the al-Nusra Front, and another al-Qaeda linked organization called Ahrar al-Sham. And John, I'd like to make the listeners sort of aware of this. There's actually been a concerted effort that Bill and I have been pushing back against to whitewash Ahrar al-Sham and try and proclaim it as somehow a partner that the U.S. can get behind in Syria to sort of as a moderate opposition group. This is total nonsense. We've actually documented the senior al-Qaeda leaders that have led Ahrar al-Sham since the beginning, and this is a group that's closely tied to al-Qaeda's official branch in Syria. These groups are fighting back against the Islamic State in northern Aleppo now, trying to reclaim the towns and villages that the Islamic State assaulted within the last 48 hours. Islamic
State's offensive at Aleppo, is this directed at the power of al-Nusra, which is the al-Qaeda organization, or is this a conflict, like a surrogate battlefield between the two organizations?
Well, you know what it is there was actually these reports by top al-Qaeda guys on Twitter, believe it or not, who were talking about how in the last couple of days, actually, the Jaysh alFath coalition, which is led by al-Qaeda and its allies, was planning on new offensives against the Assad regime. And lo and behold, the Islamic State, which has taken territory from other insurgency and rebel organizations since the beginning, decides to launch this offensive just as Jaysh alFath was about to go at the Assad regime and open up new battlefronts against them. So, this is sort of suspicious here. This is one of the reasons why there are all the sorts of claims that the Islamic State has an alliance of sorts with the Assad regime. I think some of those reports are overblown, but there's some truth to it as well. I mean, the Islamic State basically is doing the Assad regime's bidding by distracting the insurgency from Assad's forces and making them redeploy to northern Aleppo.
This machination would include the fact that the Iranians who back the Assad regime also are not attacking the Islamic State in Syria. Is that correct, Tom?
That's mostly correct. I think there have been some battles, some skirmishes, but for the most part, the Islamic State basically has its own enclaves that are sort of separate from the frontline action. The Islamic State did have some fighting against Iranian-backed forces in the Kalamun region, which is on the border there with Lebanon, between Syria and Lebanon. But just recently, actually, there was a high-level defection from the Islamic State group to the Nusra Front or another group. It's not clear. But so there have been some skirmishes there, but it's very localized. Basically, for the most part, the Islamic State has not been at loggerheads with the Assad regime and the Iranian-backed forces.
Bill Roggio joins. Bill's reporting on a significant figure on the battlefield, spotted with photographs that certainly look genuine to me, both in Baghdad and in Anbar province. His name is Soleimani. Soleimani is the Yamamoto of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps. Where Yamamoto goes, so goes the Imperial Japanese Navy, and where Soleimani goes, so goes the power of the Iranian regime. Bill, the significance here, he's back at Anbar. He was there. He was associated with Anbar during the Tikrit offensive. Is this a way of introducing that there will be a Ramadi offensive? Good evening, Bill.
Good evening, John. Yes, he is. This actually is his first visit to Anbar province that I'm aware of. He was there to. Interestingly enough, one of the photographs shows him with a map with a whole bunch of other Iraqis whose faces are blurred out. I suspect that if it was, shown that he was with top military commanders or perhaps Iraqi politicians, things probably wouldn't go so well when they had to explain this to the United States, who's been obviously opposed to Soleimani and Iran's involvement with the Shia militias in their offensive against the Islamic State. So he also was spotted in Baghdad with Mohandas, who's a top specially designated global terrorist who the U.S. government said Mohandas is basically an advisor to Soleimani, and as well as this another individual named Zaidi who leads the Eman al-A brigades, another Iranian-supported militia. So he's in town. He's actually, flitting around Iraq to help direct the latest offensive. This is what he's done in the past. He has been spotted in Tikrit and Jurf al-Shakr and other areas where the militias were taking the lead to take the fight to the Islamic State. And this is particularly problematic because the U.S. government has been saying, no, the militias that are involved in the fighting in Ramadi or here or Tikrit or there, they have nothing to do with Iran. They're part of the Iraqi government forces. They're integrated. And we launch airstrikes and give them other aid. And we wouldn't do it if they were supported by Iran, except the reality of the situation is these groups, the militias that are taking the lead are all the ones that are supported by Iran. And almost the top leaders of almost every group is either a specially designated global terrorist or is known to have close links to Soleimani.
We will not ask the State Department or the Department of Defense to explain the next fact. There was an Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps general, military commander, Yassim, killed recently in Iraq. Do we know how he died? Do we know why he was so close to the front that he would be killed, Bill?
Yeah, it wasn't a lot of information. We didn't get his rank. It was said that he was a member of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. So if that's true, and I have no reason to doubt it, this came from Iranian news sources, by the way. If some of them official Iranian outlets, so very likely a member of Quds Force, probably a major or colonel or possibly even a general. He wouldn't be the first senior officer from Quds Force to have been killed in Iraq or Syria. Often they're serving as military advisors or directing military operations, either on the front lines or back at command centers. Given that he was killed, very likely he was killed somewhere along the front
Yassim
line.
Nouri is his name. Is there any significance, Bill, to the fact that the Iranians believe they have to push their commanders to the front lines? After all, they could direct this from all the way back in Tehran. We have the capability of doing that, and they do too. Or do they have to show their faces? Is this part of the propaganda?
I think it's both. I think that the Iraqi formations that these commanders are going out to, they need the assistance, and sometimes the best assistance you can give is in military operations is face-to-face. You can't always direct these things from behind the front lines, which the United States should know better. You can't just launch an air campaign. And some of it is indeed propaganda. By having senior officers on the front lines, that means the Iranians are showing that they are committed while the Americans are not. And, not a single American has been killed attempting to, quote-unquote, degrade and defeat the Islamic State, but Iranian military officers have made that sacrifice. So it does become a propaganda point for them. And, these Iranian officials are often celebrated by these militias and even by senior Iraqi politicians as well.
Right, he was celebrated as a martyr. Bill Roggio and Tom Joscelyn of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, they keep the Long War Journal. This is a vast canvas. In the next century, when the revisionist history is published, all of this will be clear-cut. Right now, we're in the fog of war, and when we come back, Tom Joscelyn will speak of al-Jawlani. He leads al-Nusra Front in Syria. He is speaking in a surprisingly engaging fashion about the difference between al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, and the Islamic State. Bill Roggio will also speak of the significance of General Allen telling us not to worry about the Shiite support with the Iranians in Iraq, not to worry about it. I'm John Batchelor. I'm John Batchelor. Tom Joscelyn and Bill Roggio, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. They keep the Long War Journal that follows the war fighting. And right now we follow a war fighter, a warlord, right off the battlefield into the very comfortable interview state. His name is al-Jawlani. He represents al-Nusra. That's al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda in Syria. These are transnational cutthroats ordinarily. But in Syria right now, al-Jawlani is speaking as a diplomat, no, but a man who could be the leader of Syria someday with the Assad regime broken or fled. Tom, a very good evening to you again, because when I first read the coverage you gave al-Jawlani, I puzzled at a larger game going on. This isn't just about competition with the Islamic State. Where is this going, Tom?
Well, see, you have to understand al-Qaeda's strategy in the post-Arab Spring nations and what they're trying to do in various insurgencies. And what they've been trying to do is, and they've been successful in some regards, is basically deeply ingrain themselves in their ideology in the insurgencies against these governments, including the Assad regime. And so what Jawlani is doing is positioning al-Nusra Front as just part of basically of the insurgency against the Assad regime and saying that they don't have any aspirations to sort of dictate terms to everybody else around them, including Christians or other factions they're fighting alongside or anyone else. This actually isn't true. This is a sort of a stage. When you get into their literature and understand their ideology, this is a stage in their fighting. What they've done is they've now said that basically at this stage they have to remove the Assad regime and topple the Assad regime before they can begin the work to establish their Islamic State. Now, this is, of course, different from the approach taken from their rivals in the Islamic State led by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And they basically, what they did was they came in behind the rebel organizations, including Nusra Front, which cleared out the Assad regime from various areas in northern Syria, and then basically immediately started establishing their Islamic State and saying, we're going to just govern right now. So it's two different approaches to sort of the same problem, which is that the Nusra Front wants to establish an emirate, wants to establish an Islamic State, but they've concluded under al-Qaeda's guidance that right now they're going to position themselves as part of the insurgency that doesn't have any of these grandiose designs.
Al-Nusra Front, al-Qaeda. Do I see correctly that the claim al-Jawlani is making is that we'll work with our rivals, we'll suffer the philosophical or theological differences for a common purpose, and is that meant to contrast sharply with the Islamic State that only believes in slavery or death?
It absolutely is meant to contrast with the Islamic State. What the Nusra Front is saying is that they'll cooperate with other factions even if they don't believe in their sort of ideology or their version of Islam. And as long as they're cooperating against the Assad regime. Now, we've seen tension in that regard because, of course, going back to late last year, the Nusra Front really cleared out Harakat Hazim and the Syrian Revolutionaries Front, two Western-backed groups in Idlib, that they needed to take their towns and villages and their weapons away from them in order to start consolidating their control. In that case, what they basically said was that they argued that those groups had basically overstepped their bounds and had sort of done things against the Nusra Front and its allies that sort of required them to strike back. But really what was happening is those were Western-backed, American-backed groups, and the Nusra Front decided that they needed to get rid of them in order to sort of keep moving forward with their program. But the Nusra Front, this is a very sophisticated guerrilla army strategy that they're employing here. Now, whether or not they're successful in the long run remains to be seen, but they've had a lot more success than anybody gave them credit for, and they're still very much in the game, and they've captured a large amount of territory along with their allies this year.
Does Jawlani want to work with enemies of Assad? Does he want to be contacted by Turkey or the United States and enlisted as a surrogate army?
He never would negotiate with the United States, but I think that al-Qaeda's strategy in Syria, when you properly understand it, has been to have certain, in intelligence parlance, dangles or something along those lines, sort of false fronts that it can secure state support in order to keep the insurgency going and really become more robust. I think Arar al-Sham in Syria, which is a closely allied group with al-Nusra Front, was originally Al-Qaeda's original play in Syria and was designed precisely for that standpoint, that basically it was meant to put on a Syrian face on this jihadist ideology and say that basically they're there just to sort of topple Assad's regime and they can receive support from Turkey and Qatar and others. And sort of that's been the grand game that they've been playing all along. And so Arar al-Sham is continuing with that. They have their sort of advocates, their sort of paid advocates, even in the Western world, who have been trying to garner more support from the broader audience, broader international audience, in order to make their efforts successful.
Bill, the special presidential envoy for the Global Coalition to Counter ISIL, which is an acronym somewhere, is John Allen. General John Allen retired. And you have a report that General John Allen is telling us not to worry, that the United States will be very careful as it lends support for the Shiite militias in Iraq. We will not be lending support for the extremists. I saw a video, you can trust them or not, of the Shiite militia boasting about how they're burning a man to death. And they had a video of him in the background being roasted as he was strung up above the fireplace. I guess that would qualify for extremist elements. That's certainly not rules of engagement that I'm familiar with. But General Allen, what's he worried about? What's going on, Bill? I mean, why does he all of a sudden have to tell us not to worry about the Shiite militia, who, after all, fought the United States for 5 years?
Right, and keep in mind, these are Shia militias. Again, one's a specially designated global terrorist group or a foreign terrorist organization. Others have top leaders are either specially designated global terrorists or are leaders who are closely linked to Quds Force and Soleimani, General Soleimani. They are prevalent in the battlefield. They're leading the fight, and they're going into Sunni areas and where the U.S. and conducting operations where the U.S. is conducting airstrikes.
And we're supporting them. We have less than a minute, Bill. We're supporting them, correct?
The U.S. is providing airstrikes during these operations, so the U.S. in turn is providing military support for specially designated global
We're supporting those guys who burned a guy to death and boasted about it on a vine. That's who we're supporting.
Yeah, and look, I think this is a case of where General Allen and members of the U.S. government, U.S. military, are so desperate to defeat the Islamic State that they'd literally get in bed with Satan in order to do so, and that's what they're doing. They're getting in bed with militias. These militias never reconciled with the U.S. People say to me all the time, well, former insurgents, they formed the awakening. Yeah, after reconciling with the U.S. and reconciling with the Iraqi government. These militias have not done such things and threatened to kill Americans to this day.
Old proverb, you lie down with dogs, you get up with fleas. Bill Roggio and Tom Joscelyn of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, Long War Journal. The war in Iraq, the war in Syria, not well. I'm John Batchelor.